by literature, been shattered by the claim that certain books are not just books, but they were dictated by the creator of the universe.
Do you think the force of public opinion is strong enough to fight the tide of some of the scarier phenomena we're talking about here, whether it's the belief that Armageddon is a good thing or that martyrdom is a good thing? If the gloves were off, so to speak, and politeness were not the order of the day, is the force of that kind of public argument enough?
Well, I think it has to be, because the only alternative is violence. This is the problem I see, is that when the stakes are high, we have a choice between conversation and violence. And at the level of societies, we have a choice between conversation, negotiation, and war. And there are all kinds of us-them thinking, all instances of us-them thinking that we have to transcend. Nationalism, tribalism, racism. But the problem with religious thinking is that it is the only mode of discourse in which we make a transcendental object of the differences between in-group and out-group. The difference between you and your neighbor is not merely that you don't like the color of his skin, but what he believes about God is going to separate you and him for eternity. This is a kind of in-group, out-group thinking that we have to transcend, and it's either conversation or violence is going to continually be generated along these lines, where we have people reflexively identifying with their religious group, where we have Christians against Muslims, against Jews, making incompatible claims on certain real estate in the Middle East based on what their scripture tells them. This is really what's going on. We live in a world that is every bit as strange as a world in which people killed one another over rival interpretations of the plays of Shakespeare. Imagine if the Shia and the Sunni were killing each other in Iraq right now because one group liked King Lear more than Hamlet. This is really what is going on. That would be such an astonishingly strange situation that we would think it could never come about, but it has come about. It's just we're talking about different books and different modes of literary disagreement.
There's an interesting view, a very strong dissenting view from the scholar Karen Armstrong, who says this is inflammatory talk, and for one thing, it's convincing Muslims all over the world who are not extremists that the West is incurably Islamophobic, and the West will never respect any sort of Muslim tradition. What would you say to Karen Armstrong?
Yeah, well, obviously we disagree about this. There's a seed of truth in what she's saying, in that it is what I'm saying is scary to and would be scary to many Muslims. And for that reason, I would be the first to agree that we all shouldn't speak the way I'm speaking. I would not want the President of the United States to speak about Islam the way I speak about Islam. It would be far too inflammatory, and we can see the effects of what the Pope's remarks were on the Muslim world. People literally got killed for what he said. And so we have to be cognizant of that fact. But listen to what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who are so peevish with regard to their religious sensitivities that they're going to go out and murder people when they consider their religion insulted, when their prophet gets caricatured. Merely depicted. Most of those cartoons were simply drawings of a man with a beard. People will take to the streets and begin killing people. So we are being held hostage by totally unacceptable religious sensitivities, essentially by the mob, and we have to talk candidly about that. And we have to get Muslims, moderate Muslims, wherever they are, to speak candidly about that, about how unacceptable that is. And until they do in sufficient numbers, we are going to be in this incredibly dangerous situation where the one wrong utterance on the part of a person in power in the West will literally translate into massive riots in the Muslim world. Karen, I think, apologizes for that far too much, and we have to get past this situation and get the Muslims of the world to realize this is a deal breaker. We're not going to accommodate this kind of divisive medieval mythology. And we can't accommodate it in a global civil society. You are believing exactly what you cannot believe if you want to be integrated in a global civil society, and we have to make this case. How we do that is a very difficult question in diplomacy, and I'm clearly not a diplomat and would be the first to admit it.
The presidents of Italy and Great Britain just recently spoke out against Muslim women wearing the full face veil.
Mm-hmm.
And this is becoming very, very contentious because it prompts the question, to what degree can non-Muslims tell Muslims what their faith should look like? Is it within the right of non-Muslims to say, okay, the veil has to go, this has to go, that has to go, because you're not integrating, because this is the mark of difference? Is that legit?
Right.
Is that legit?
Right. Well, this is actually a question on which I'm torn because in the abstract, I think it's the wrong thing to do to pass laws against this kind of behavior. I don't think we should have laws against Holocaust denial, as I said. And, I would think that passing laws against veiling girls would be a bad thing. I think people should be free to wear whatever they want to wear, within certain limits, perhaps. But I have some sympathy with it because what you're talking about a circumstance in which young girls are being obliged to behave this way, and then they grow up into women who will, in many cases, claim that they want to behave this way. And I think they're wrong to want to behave this way. And I think there's, and this comes back to questions of right and wrong in some generalizable sense. It doesn't matter how many women in burqas you can prop up in Afghanistan who say they want to be in burqas. I think they're wrong to want to be in burqas. I think that a society which convinces women that they want to live their lives veiled in that way is a society that is harming its women. And I think there's certainly an argument to be made that this can be generalized. This is not just a mere difference of opinion. And so I do see this as a circumstance of a kind of child abuse, a religiously sanctioned child abuse, and it's knit together with many other practices that we should find unacceptable, like forced marriages, and in the extreme case, honor killing, where you have and female circumcision. This is just sheer barbarism, and it goes on in Western Europe and not only in the Middle East. So we have to come to the aid of Muslim women, and ultimately it can't matter if some subset of Muslim women will say, we don't want your aid, we want to be veiled, we want to be circumcised, and we understand it when our husbands beat us to death for being raped. There are literally Muslim women who will defend every barbarous practice to the end. They have been brainwashed, or whatever you want to call it. They're not good witnesses to the morality here. And so I don't know what the answer is in terms of passing laws, but this practice really has to be criticized, and the taboos around criticizing it, I think, have to come off.
There's a novelist I admire very much. His name is Jim Crace, and he once described himself as being so vehement in his atheism, it's practically North Korean. Is there a danger that atheists can be just as fundamentalist in outlook and proselytizing as anyone who calls themselves religious?
I don't think so. I think it's more just a play upon words. People talk about atheism being a faith. It's the faith that there is no God. They talk about science being a religion. These are just turns of phrase that I think when you unpack them are pretty barren of content. All I'm doing as an atheist, I don't even think the word atheism should exist. We don't have words for not being an astrologer, for instance. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I'm not an astrologer, I'm not an astrologer. And nobody joins a group for people who don't accept astrology. We just use words like reason and common sense, and we demand evidence, and then all of a sudden we stop paying attention to astrologers because they're not being sufficiently reasonable, they don't have good evidence, and their arguments are terrible. So the same mode of rejection and intellectual honesty can apply to the irrational religious certainties. We can talk about more diaphanous conceptions of God. We can talk about the idea that maybe this universe was designed, but first of all, there's no good argument really to suggest that it was designed, and there's absolutely no argument to suggest that if it was